that I work with him. And in my life, and I'm 28 now, I've had at least 10 friends, and alhamdulillah, Ibrahim is okay, but I've had at least 10 friends under the age of 25 that passed away in my own life, right? And as you guys get older, does anyone right now know anyone that they were close to, whether it's a cousin or a friend that was under 25 that passed away? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. As you get older, this number will go up and up. Okay? And when I was visiting Ibrahim, when we first heard, the night of the accident, when I heard of the accident and I saw it on the news, and many of you may have seen that video where they show the car, we were like, they were saying he was in critical condition, but he was okay. In my heart, I thought there was no way that he was alive. So when I went to the hospital, people were still confused about what was going on. And in my mind, I had accepted the fact that he was gone. And this was the thought that was going through my mind as I had accepted that, right? And as you guys know, I work with him every day. I had seen him the day before. Just so happens that day of work, I hadn't gone to work at the office. So what came to mind is something that one of my teachers told me when I was about 17 years old. I want all of us to listen to this carefully. And for the people who are at the reunion, this will be a good reminder, inshallah, for you. And this is not a speech I prepared. I'm saying this from my heart. I'm saying this to your heart, okay? So all of you are giving me your attention, but I don't want your ears, I want your hearts. If you listen with your ears, it'll go into your mind. I'm not interested in that. If it goes into your mind, it becomes a fun fact. Right? You can go to Wikipedia and learn a lot. This is not Wikipedia. I want this to enter your heart so it'll actually change you. Do you know the difference? If you just hear it, you'll remember it, you may forget it, you may quote it on your Facebook status. That's not what I'm interested in. Listen with your heart, and then you'll understand what I'm saying. Cool? Okay. Sometimes in our life, I want you to imagine someone's driving down the road, okay? And the speed limit is like 70 miles per hour and they're going 100. When you're going that fast, and it just so happens the person who hit Ibrahim, he was escaping from the cops and he was going around 100 miles per hour, by the way. And the speed limit was like 35 where he was driving. Imagine that. If we're speeding down the highway and we see the signs, and the sign may say caution, it may say, there's children crossing here, it may say the speed limit. If you're driving really fast, what happens to those signs? They go unnoticed, but even if you look for them, what happens? They become blurry. Why do they become blurry? Because of our speed, exactly. If you're driving slowly and you see a sign, you have more time to read it and it's clear, right? If you go faster, it starts to become blurry and all the signs are going by like this, okay? What happens sometimes in our life, when our life is moving so fast, the signs of Allah start to become more and more blurry. So even if we hear a verse of Quran, or we hear Mufti Rabbani or Sheikh Layla or one of our teachers saying something, their messages become blurry to us. Why? Because we're going so fast, we don't take the time to hear it. Does that make sense? One of the challenges of our time, and I have a policy, those of you who know me from Camp Al Hilal or other things, you know this, I speak to everyone like adults. Whether you're 7 years old, whether you're 10, 12, I speak to you like an adult. So I hope you understand that. I'm not speaking to you like a kid or whatever. So I'm just going to be completely real with you, and I think you'll get it, inshallah, okay? Sometimes in our life, we have this perception of what our life should look like. So we have, for example, our school. We have our social life, whatever. What has happened the last 10 years is that everyone is trying to make everything faster and faster. Cars are getting faster. The internet speed is getting faster. If you guys knew, it's very funny when I'm in the coffee shop or something and I see someone young and they're getting very frustrated that something's not downloading. It's like a movie they want to download. And it's like taking 3 minutes. And I remember when our speeds were it was 56 megabytes. I don't know. Like when you want to listen to a song, if you were downloading it, you would download it and 3 days later you would pray that it was still downloading. And every 8 hours it would stop and you'd be making tahajjud, please just stop buffering, right? Things have gotten so fast and we've gotten used to it. But the problem is when the world gets faster and faster and faster and our hearts aren't keeping up with that by getting closer to Allah, then we start to drift away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like a train that's going to Allah and we're getting left behind. So the first thing, this is a very practical advice, okay? And this may be an advice that you may never have heard before, but I think it's really, really important. The first thing we have to do as young people is we have to slow down our life. Slow down our life. There's a movement in cooking. I don't know if you ever heard of, you guys know what fast food is, right? There's a movement in cooking, in the culinary arts, it's called the slow cooking movement. Has anyone heard of that? They're basically encouraging people to cook slower than they cook right now. Because in trying to make things fast, the actual blessing of the food is being sucked out of it. You guys may have heard that experiment where the guy took a McDonald's burger and he left it out for like a year or something, and it was perfectly the same after a year. The burger hadn't changed. Some of you may be like, that's awesome. You can just forget to eat the burger and eat it the next day. If food is staying the same after a year, there's something seriously wrong with that food. Right? Like, what are we eating, right? But the same principle applies to our lives. Sometimes, if we're just going fast, it's like the person on the highway. We're trying to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going 100 miles per hour. But because when you're going fast, what happens if you try to check your Google Maps while you're going fast? Let's say you don't have a GPS. Probably get in an accident, right? When we go so fast, we don't even get to stop and see if we're going the right way. We're just speeding. And I've had this. Men generally are very bad about asking for directions. So my sisters will always be like, just ask someone, ask. And I'll be like, no, I'll figure it out. And you start, you're trying to make up time, so you're driving 80 miles per hour, and then an hour later you realize you're going on the wrong way on the highway. What happens? The faster you're going, if you don't check for directions, you're going in the opposite direction faster. Okay? So what happens, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, and I truly believe that what happened to Ibrahim was a wake-up call to this community, to the Michigan community. And I'll tell you something. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends wake-up calls, if that doesn't wake people up, the next way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wakes us up is much harsher. If you look at all the stories of the prophets, they were sent warners. And when they didn't wake up, when even the harshest warning came, that's when the real punishment came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know what the wake-up call is? If you're driving on the highway, you ignore one sign, you ignore another sign, and suddenly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends you a roadblock. You literally can't go any further. Right? When something happens like this, where someone almost dies, or maybe something in our family happens, maybe one of our grandparents, like I lost 2 grandparents the last 2 years, right? So when something like that happens, that's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is literally forcing us to stop. And then once we stop, we have to look around. We have to ask ourselves one question. Okay? Listen to this very carefully. If we were in a car crash, remember, this was the car crash that happened to Ibrahim, it could have happened to any of us. It was some guy who was a drug dealer running away from the cops with a stolen car and he hit him. Is there anyone in this room that's safe from that happening to them? This is a real question I'm asking. Is anyone here safe from that happening to them? Now here's the question. And those of you who know me know this, I've been in 2 life and death accidents. Once I was hit by a semi-truck that fell asleep, and the second time I was hit by a drunk driver. Now listen to this very carefully. When I was 17 or 16 years old, I was hit by a drunk driver. And the entire front of the car was gone. It was very similar to Ibrahim's accident. If I had died that day, my day of judgment would have started. That very moment. There's 2 days of judgment, right? There's the main day of judgment that everyone will have together, and then there's the personal day of judgment. Our personal day of judgment starts the moment we die. That's when our personal day of judgment starts, in our grave. Imagine this. Some of us are already thinking about Eid plans. I have friends who are already buying Eid gifts. And that's beautiful. Inshallah, we make it. But here's a very real question. If we don't make it till tomorrow, how many of us are ready to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our current good deeds and sins? This is a serious question. How many of us right now, if we were told that we're dying within 30 seconds and there's nothing we can do, and we start saying, astaghfirullah, 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 we start getting really panicky. We may die in 15 seconds from a heart attack just hearing that, right? How many of us will be confident that when the angel comes, we'll answer correctly? And when we're lowered into our grave and we wake up, because we're told in our tradition that when you go into your grave, that's when the human being really wakes up, that we're going to feel very comfortable. And as we wait for the day of judgment, we feel like we're going to be okay. Is anyone here confident of that? Huh? Anyone? This is why Ramadan has a sense of urgency and desperation. It's not enough for us to do, itikaf and like chill with our friends and pray a little bit. We have to be desperate. The only people who receive Allah's mercy are the desperate. We're not knocking on Allah's door. We're not whispering. We're on our knees praying and crying and begging. And if we're not, then we don't know what's really happening. Because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, there are people who see the day of judgment as far away, وَنَرَاهُ قَرِيبًا. We see it as very close. Does that make sense? Let me give you an example. Abdullah ibn Rawah radiallahu anhu, he was one of the great companions. He was in one of the great battles. The Prophet ﷺ assigned Zayd radiallahu anhu to be the first flag bearer, right? And then he assigned Jafar ibn Abi Talib and Abdullah ibn Rawah to follow after him. And then after that he says, if all three of them die, and the reason he assigned three of them is because he knew that this was a battle where they were going to die one after another. May Allah bless all of them. He then said that the companions should pick someone from amongst them, and that was the first battle that Khalid bin Walid became the general of the Muslims, right? When this companion Abdullah, radiallahu anhu, who was handpicked by the Prophet, he was one of the closest companions to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was struck down. And this is the famous battle when Jafar ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu, the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the brother of Ali, the one who had led the Muslims in Abyssinia and spoken before Najashi, he had actually just come back from Abyssinia and he was sent out to this war. When he dies in this battle, this is the battle where he had one hand cut off and he held the flag with the other hand. He had that hand cut off and he was holding it with his arms when they finally killed him, right? But this other companion, Abdullah, who was also holding the flag, what was happening was because they were fighting odds of over 1 to 20, as soon as someone would grab the flag, the enemy would attack that person. So Abdullah got struck down, but he didn't die till later, until after the battle. So he was laying on the battlefield and the companions rushed to him. And they started saying good things to him because he was dying. And they said, you're a shaheed. We know the status of the shaheed, right? The martyr. They said, you spent your whole life with the Prophet ﷺ. Look at this great honor the Prophet gave you. And Abdullah bin Rawah is crying. He's crying. And they say, why are you crying? You died in the best way possible. Right? And to this day we talk about it. You know why he was crying? Because he understood something that we're still trying to understand. The reason he was crying is he said the following. He says, no matter what I've done in my life, no matter what, you guys are listing all these, no matter what I've done, and no matter how I'm dying, as inshallah as a shaheed, he says, I know that one day after I die, I will stand on that bridge, the Sirat, we know that bridge, right? As thin as a sword and as sharp as sharp as a sword and as thin as a piece of paper. How many people, you guys all know about this, right? And we're going to have to cross it to get into heaven. He says, no matter what I've done in my life, I know that there will come a day where I will stand on that bridge and I will start to cross over hellfire and I don't know what's going to happen to me. After everything he had done, he did not feel confident that he was making it to heaven. One of the closest companions of the Prophet ﷺ said, Wallahi, if I have one foot in heaven, what? I won't feel secure until my other foot is in heaven. Omar radiallahu anhu, one of the greatest companions, went to the companion who had been given the list of the hypocrites. What did he say to him? He says, show me that list. I want to know if Omar is a hypocrite. And that companion is like looking at Omar like, you? Like, he's one of the people promised paradise. Even then, he's not giving himself a break. The question is, do we feel so secure that we're going to heaven that we think we're ahead of the companions? Because the companions that were promised heaven, like Omar, radiallahu anhum, they used to cry all night begging Allah for His mercy. Because they didn't think they had it. You know in Monopoly they have like a get out of jail free card? Some of us really think we have a get out of hell free card because we're Muslim. We claim to be Muslim. When the companions were afraid they were hypocrites. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar at different occasions thought that they were hypocrites. They questioned that, right? So what I'm saying, this is the way I want to start inshallah, is that this Ramadan, we have two ways that we can approach these last few days. One way is we're going like, you know, if it's like a marathon and you see the race ending and you start to sprint, right? Because you know, and people are saying this is the home stretch, you know, we're going to sprint. But what happens when you sprint at the end of the marathon? What happens when the race is over? Huh? You kind of, you just stop, right? I mean, you walk a little bit, cool off, and then you're done for, right? You burn out. Let me be very clear. This is not the home stretch. Listen to this very carefully. That analogy of the home stretch of Ramadan's marathon, this is not the home stretch. In our tradition, Ramadan is the starting point, not the end point. The race doesn't end with Eid. The race ends with death. Who knows Surah Mulk? We have some hafaz here. Can you recite the beginning of Surah Mulk? If you could recite a little bit loud, please. Actually, just recite. It's okay. Just recite the first few verses.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور.
Who knows the meaning of that verse he just recited? الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم what? أيكم أحسن عملا. Now, the one who created what? Life and death to test the one who is best in deeds. So the race goes till death. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we're at the starting point when Eid starts. That's why when the Prophet ﷺ was asked by Khadija, rahmatullah alayha, he says, because in the early part of his message, you know, he had just been given this burden of prophethood. And he wanted to save as many people as he could. So he was praying all night and all day he was giving dawah. So finally his beloved wife said to him, isn't it time for some rest? Can't you rest a bit? What did he respond? Ya Khadija, the time for rest is over. We've been told that this entire life, listen to this very carefully, this entire life of ours is Ramadan. Our Eid is in heaven. Do you understand? Our entire life is Ramadan. Our entire life is supposed to be a struggle. Eid is not when we let off the gas. Eid is when we accelerate. One of my teachers, Dr. Kamran Riaz, some of you know him, he was in Chicago for a while, and now he's in, he's actually just got back to Chicago from Texas. So he once said that sometimes what we do is, you know what the pep rally is? Have you ever had a pep rally in your school, like before a big football game or whatever? Is when the whole school gets together and everyone chants, and then what happens? You have the football game or basketball game after that, right? He says that sometimes we keep having pep rallies and we never play the game. We go to ISNA convention, everyone gets pumped up. We're gonna change the world! And then everyone goes back from ISNA and it's like, well, next year we'll go back to ISNA and talk about changing the world. We're supposed to change the world in between that time. Or in the end of Ramadan, we're like, yeah, I feel so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now I can eat and I can chill and I can make up on every summer movie I wasn't able to watch in Ramadan. So the first week after Ramadan, we watched like 9 movies in the theater because we have all those blockbusters that we didn't watch. And Wolverine, we have the times ready. The 30th night of Ramadan, we're like on Fandango buying tickets. And that's fine. I don't think movies are haram. The point is, it's time to accelerate. And here's the thing. This is a point I was going to make earlier. There's 2 ways that we can approach the end of Ramadan. For some of us, and inshallah this will not be for anyone here, it was a nice, inspiring moment, and then we'll return back to our lives. But I promise you there is another option. Listen to this very carefully, okay? And maybe this will only apply to 5 of you in this room. And in that case, I'm speaking to those 5. But maybe it'll apply, inshallah, to all of us. If you ask anyone that's older than yourself, and maybe some of yourself also, there's a moment in your life, and there's always one moment. There's a moment in your life when something clicks inside of you. Something snaps. It's not temporary. It's not like, oh, I feel so inspired by the speaker, and then tomorrow you're back to normal. That's just inspiration. That comes and goes. You know, like when you hear like a really like pumped up song, like, you know, maybe you're working out and you're hearing something, and you feel like adrenaline then goes away. Sometimes our religion is like that. We just get really pumped up. It's like our Islam is like Red Bull. You know, we drink a little Islam. It's like a power drink, and then we have a crash, and we're like, oh my God, I need a break from Islam for at least a month, right? But there's another type of person that their Islam is not this adrenaline up and down. What happens is they have a moment, and that moment is so powerful that something snaps inside of them. Literally, like you can feel it, like I'm changed. And after that, yeah, they may make a few mistakes, but they're never the same again. Their life was like this, and it doesn't go like this. It's like this, and it jumps. And when it jumps, they're a different person. Listen to me carefully, I'm not joking. If you look at the life of Omar, radiallahu anhu, the day that, I know we've all heard the story of how he was going to kill the Prophet ﷺ, but listen to this very carefully. Umar wasn't only going to kill the Prophet ﷺ that day, before he was Muslim. He was actually on a suicide mission. Because even if he was a tough guy, if he had entered that house with all those other companions, with Hamza and everyone, and even if he had killed the Prophet ﷺ, what would have happened to him? He knew he was going to die. You know, when we tell the story, we say, oh, he was going to kill the Prophet. That wasn't it. He was so angry, and he had lost his mind so much. He was literally on a suicide mission. He was ready to die that day. How ironic that the day that Umar was ready to die is the day that he came to life. Who else but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could do that? The day that Umar was to die was the first day of his life. Because when he held the Quran and the pages that he had of the Quran, and he took it from his sister after he did wudu, she wouldn't give it to him until he did wudu, and he read from Surah Taha, and he read the story of Musa. And it's interesting because the Prophet ﷺ said what? Abu Bakr is like Ibrahim, radiallahu anhu, is like Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Umar is like Musa. And he read the story of the person that resembles him. Why? Because Musa had kind of an anger problem early in his life, right? He hit the guy and he killed him. Umar was the same. He's like, I get this guy. And then he read about the Pharaoh and what's going through Umar's mind. Remember this. He was like one of like the, you know, like, has anyone ever seen like a mobster movie? Like Godfather or something? You always have that one guy that goes and knocks everyone out for you. He's like the enforcer. You guys know what I'm talking about? You guys know or you don't? Yeah. So he's like the tough guy that's like, you know, the bodyguard or whatever. That was Umar, radiallahu anhu. He was the biggest like bully for the Quraysh. Suddenly he reads those verses of the Quran and literally his heart changes. It's not a shift. It's not like, oh, this is another way of looking at it. He's not the same guy anymore. The only thing that remains the same is his name. And when he knocks on the Prophet ﷺ's door, and Dar al-Arqam where the companions are, and he goes in and he converts, what's the first thing he says to the Prophet ﷺ? He's the same guy that was bullying the companions a few hours before. What does he say? Why are we praying inside? Why are we hiding? Why don't we go to the Kaaba and pray? And the companions are looking at him. It's like, are you serious? Why don't we pray outside? Because of you. Like 2 hours ago you were like beating us up, and now you're like, hey, why are we inside? It's like you're talking like you're one of us now. Why? Because his heart had changed. He went from one of the worst people to one of the greatest people in a moment. That's the power of transformation. But one of the dangers of our society is that our life is moving so fast that we don't have enough peace of mind to actually change. What I'm saying to you just goes in and out, like a status message or a text. And it doesn't stay. And I know this because I've been talking to youth for the last 10 years. But I know there's another way. That if you can stop your heart for one moment, and stop your mind, and stop your thoughts, and stop your desires, and stop your ambitions to become anything, a doctor, engineer, whatever, and go to college, and stop your ambition to even have suhoor tomorrow, and think of nothing but the moment that we're in right now. If you're able to do that, like the Prophet ﷺ did when he used to go to the cave Hira, if we're able to enter into our own cave Hira, where we get rid of Makkah, because we have our own Makkah in our minds, and we leave Makkah for a moment, and we go into our own cave inside of our minds, and we make a commitment to change, we can literally become a different person. That is possible. Literally, it is possible. Like in Surah Rahman, who knows Surah Rahman? وَالسَّابِقُونَ السَّابِقُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ فِي جَنَّاتِ النَّعِيمِ ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ Surah Waqi'ah, afwan. ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنَ الْآخِرِينَ. When it's talking about the sabiqun, the best of the best, it doesn't say that there's a lot from the earlier days and there's none from the later days. It says there's many from the earlier days and there's a few from the later days. And when we hear that, we should want to be that few. Do you understand what I'm saying? Let's go back to, I don't know if you really get it, so let's go back for a second. Let's go back to the story of Umar radiallahu anhu. And there's something about this story that is often missed. I want everyone, I know you guys are smart, and you're going to need your intelligence to really get this, okay? So can I have everyone sit up first? Yeah, thank you. I know you're tired, but, there were people your age that used to fight in battles in Ramadan. There were 12 and 13-year-olds in the Battle of Badr. So we just need to toughen up a little bit as men, right? So just sit up, okay. So I think we're just pampered too much, like we're just too rich, and like our parents struggled to get the money we have, and we just got it. So we become like the spoiled generation. Like if the Battle of Uhud happened right now, man, as long as it's not on Halo, we'd be done for. Yeah. So if we go back to the story of Umar radiallahu anhu for a moment, okay? You guys with me? Let me tell you the secret of that story. Okay, so let me paint the picture. He's going to kill the Prophet ﷺ. That companion who's secretly Muslim tells him, hey, why don't you clean up your own house first? He's trying to buy some time to warn the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So he goes to his sister's house. His sister is with her husband and another companion. Saeed radiallahu anhu, right? He's there too. Right? He goes in. The companion is smart. He hides. He's like, I ain't having any of this, Umar. If you've you probably haven't seen The Wire, but there's a character named Umar, and everyone's scared of him too. But anyways, but when Umar's coming, like everyone knows, like everyone runs for it. Oh, it's just a joke for Mubin. If I don't give inside jokes, he doesn't pay attention. He falls asleep in his hood. That's why he wears a hood, mashallah. And also he's so handsome, he has to wear hijab, mashallah. So now, yeah, I know, we're even though because he got here earlier. So so when Umar, you may want to just edit that. So when, for his sake, maybe don't edit it. But like Umar radiallahu anhu, when he's entering into the house, right, and he's hearing the Quran from outside. Now let me ask you guys a question, because this is a part of the story that's missed a lot of times. Had Umar radiallahu anhu ever heard the Quran before? That's not a rhetorical question. You can answer it. Yes or no? He had never heard the Quran. Just living years in Makkah, just never heard it. He had heard it all the time. So the question is, when he read Surah Taha, why did it change his life? When he had heard it for so many different times. What was different? Listen to this very carefully. Because for some of us, we've also heard all the lectures for years. And we've heard verses of the Quran and we've heard hadith. But it hasn't had that same effect that it did for Umar. And similarly, Umar had heard the Quran for years and it hadn't had the same impact. What was different about that day? Listen carefully. When he goes into the house, what state do you think he's in emotionally? Murderous. Exactly, that's good. He wasn't angry. He was like angry to the point he wanted to kill someone. Right? Yeah. When he sees his sister and her husband, and he goes after the husband and the sister gets in the way and he hits her. He is murderous, right? Because why? Where was he headed? He was going to kill the Prophet ﷺ. Now, do you think at that state if he had read the Quran his heart would have changed? No. Something had to happen before that. When he was really angry, if his sister wasn't smart, what would she have done? She would have been like, hey, read the Quran. He's like about to hit her. He's like, I don't want to read the Quran right now, right? What happened? Listen to this, because we have to do the same thing Umar did. When he was angry, he wasn't ready to understand it. And his whole life he had been angry at the Prophet ﷺ since he became a prophet. That's why his heart had become close to the Quran. He didn't have that moment of peace yet in his heart. And even if we're not angry, we haven't found that moment of peace yet because our life is moving too fast. What happens is when he hits his sister and he sees his sister bleeding, his heart melts. It was burning with fire and suddenly it melts with compassion. At that moment, for the first time in Umar's life, radiallahu anhu, his heart is not hardened to the Prophet ﷺ and his message. Is the first time, like if you think of it as like if you think of it as soil, right? If you have rock and you put a seed on it and put water, will it grow? No. His whole life, his heart had been like rock. No matter how many times, yeah, it may make a little dent, but it won't enter and blossom. The second he saw his sister bleeding, his heart melted. Just for a little and if he had waited, it would have gone back to being like it was. But just for that moment, his heart softened, and then he says, let me see the Quran. And she says, no. She says, you're not pure, you have to make wudu first. Now hold on. If you're watching this as a movie, okay, and you have like your biggest enemy who is about to change his ways, he's like, okay, fine. Let me just read the Quran. What would we do? If you're watching, you're like, dude, give him the Quran, give it, right? No. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't like, okay, yes, please just become Muslim. She's like, no, you have to make wudu first. The guy's about to kill the Prophet ﷺ. You're going to make him follow fiqh? You're gonna bring out a technicality? One, she knew that she had to follow the rules. Two, she understood what wudu would do to him. Because wudu has an incredible ability to soften someone. So when he does wudu, it not only is there because it's the right thing to do, it also is a way for him to cool down. Do you understand? If you're really angry and you put cold water on yourself, your heart softens even more. Now, finally, when he opens the Quran and starts to read it, his heart is still. It has slowed down. You understand what I'm saying? If you go running, or if you're really like angry, what happens to your heartbeat? It goes fast, right? What happens when you calm down? It slows down. That's why I'm saying our lives have to slow down. Because as soon as Umar's heart slows down and his heart softens, when the Quran comes, what happens? It doesn't bounce off. Like for many of us, we hear a speech and we forget it. He hears it, it goes deep into his heart, and you're like a plant that takes roots into the ground. The roots go all the way in there and nothing can break it then. That's why they say about Umar that when he goes one way, the shaitan, what does he do? He goes another way. I know we hear that, but do you understand what that means? Like if shaitan is scared of someone, that guy is a boss. You know what I mean? Shaitan's not just scared of random people. But why? Because his heart was so soft. The Quran was like a seed that went deep into his heart and immediately started to grow a plant. And so by the time he got to the Prophet ﷺ, his face was different. He wasn't the same guy. So the question becomes, have we ever had that moment in our lives where we've heard something that has gone so deep into our soul that we are never the same after that? No matter what happens in public school, no matter how tempting it is to go to prom, no matter how many of our Muslim friends are up to nonsense, some of them even in the masjid, no matter what is going on, the roots are so deep in our hearts that we may sway but will never break again. Do you understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying or no? Tell me. Do you get what I'm saying? One of the companions, for example, he was a simple Bedouin. Listen to this. Sometimes we think like if someone doesn't have like a Harvard education, they're dumb, astaghfirullah, must have not studied in high school. Some of our, I mean, just to be very honest, and yeah, I'm not saying don't get a good education, you should, inshallah. Some of our greatest companions, though, they were simple people. When it came to like knowledge of the world and stuff, they didn't know that much. A simple Bedouin came to the Prophet ﷺ. Nowadays, the Bedouins, we would see them as like the guys who live in trailer parks. I'm serious, that's the equivalent of a Bedouin. Traveling from place to place, kind of tough, not very sharp. They happen to have very good language, but that's it. It's like if everyone in the trailer park like knew Shakespeare. Those were like the Bedouins. They were like really simple people. They would eat like beans and be like, hey, come have some cornmeal. But then they'd be like, to be or not to be? That is like it was this weird, you know. But except for language, these guys had nothing going on for them. Okay? One of them came to the Prophet ﷺ. And I'm not making fun of him, by the way. I'm actually saying that we can learn something. Sometimes we make our Islam so much about trying to understand it that we stop feeling it. Sometimes we need a little bit of Bedouin Islam in our life. Very simple, pure, deep. You understand what I'm saying? He comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, listen to this very carefully. What he heard from the Prophet ﷺ, he may not have heard so many fun facts and things. He had heard something very simple, but it had gone deep into his heart. He had heard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see us wherever we are. How many of us have heard that? We haven't though. We think we've heard it. We've heard it with our ears. Those of you who were here earlier today when I gave the talk, I said what? For all the five senses, there's an external dimension, our physical senses, and there's what? The same senses come into our hearts too. He heard it from his heart, not from his ears. So when he heard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was watching him at every moment, and watching not only his body, watching his thoughts, watching his emotions, watching the stuff that he hides inside of his head. When he understood that, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, is that true? He just wanted to know, is it true that the Lord of the heavens and the earth is watching me at every second of my life? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes. The man had a heart attack and died. Now listen to it very carefully. This is what's in the story, heart attack. Why was it a heart attack? You know what we would get? We would get an ear infection. Because we listen with these ears. Because he listened with his heart broke. His heart could not bear the thought that every time he had sinned, his Lord had been watching him. Like it was such a pressure on him that his heart, literally his physical heart, collapsed. Because he understood that his Lord, the one who created him, had been watching him his whole life. And we have heard that, but do we believe it? Do we believe it? Do we? If we believe it, do you think it would be so easy for us to do sins? I'm talking to everyone. How tough would it be to do sins if we were to look up at the sky and we could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala watching us? That's why Imam Ali rahmatullahi said, it is only our ignorance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that allows us to sin against Him. The only reason we're able to sin is because we don't realize who we are sinning against. If we realize who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really is, we would find it impossible for us to sin. If we really knew who He is. Does that make sense? So it's time as young people, okay? I'm tired. I'm telling you, I'm tired of having to we're still trying to make sure people stay Muslim. I'm expecting, if you're between the ages of 8 and 18, I'm expecting you guys to be the heads of everything. I don't mean like leaders, like, oh, you're in charge. Like in our community, the leader is a servant, right? If you're between the ages of 8 and 18, you're supposed to be building this community. You're supposed to be the role models. You're supposed to be the ones in the front line. And we're still having youth talks to keep young Muslims religious. I'm hearing talks that there's communities, and inshallah this is not one of them. And I'm not saying this to say, oh, everyone's doing it. But I'm hearing talk that there are some Muslims out there who are drinking alcohol, like young Muslims, who are doing drugs. And this better not be happening at IGD. And I'm not even going to tell you guys not to do it, because I know no one in this room would do that. No one. I mean, that's like way out there. And if you're doing it, tonight it has to end. But the world needs you guys too much for us to be worrying about if you guys are going to date or not. Dating is not even like a possibility for us. Like, we shouldn't even have religious talks on dating. Like, dating, if you think that it's an option, then we haven't read the hadith about what happens to people that do that stuff on the Day of Judgment, in hellfire. Looking at bad things on the internet, I'm tired of those talks. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm tired of the point of like, if this is what it means to be a Muslim, I'm tired of talking about this stuff that's done by people who aren't, Muslims shouldn't even be doing this stuff. What I want to do with you all, as part of the group, not as a leader, just as one of you, I want us to start talking about how we can start living like companions. I'm tired of talking about Abu Jahl. I want to talk about Abu Bakr now. Because so many of our talks are just about make them excited about Islam again. No. Do you claim to be part of the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ? That's a question. How many of you claim to be part of the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ? Raise your hand. Adults? Okay, so let's stop talking about dating and alcohol. If you want to make that claim, we have to live up to it. Do you understand what I'm saying? The standards have to be a little bit higher. And I'm saying this to this group because you're here tonight. And if you're here tonight, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you to be here. It's nothing to do with you. It's a gift from Allah. And if you want to thank Him for that gift, use this as an opportunity to change yourself completely. And you know the proof is that you've changed yourself? If you want to know what is the proof that that snap has happened inside of you, like it happened to Umar radiallahu anhu, 1 week from now, your fire will be growing, it won't be getting less. You're going to go home and you're going to be, if you go on Google and you Google companions of the Prophet, there's a website that has the 30 stories of the main companions. That's the first thing you're going to do after you leave here. And tomorrow you're going to start reading those companion stories and you're going to start, it's like, like when you're, like if you were to see like, okay, so you're going to play basketball against someone and you watch them practicing, what are you thinking? It's like, I need to learn what they're doing because they're my competition. If we start reading the companion stories and we start seeing them as our competition, something very incredible is going to happen in this community. IAGD will be a light for Michigan. But if we keep living like, I'm going to get excited by Islam, then let's not claim to be part of the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because I always say this, I said this to some of the Camp al-Hilal kids. You know what the all-star team is? Like the dream team in basketball? Or like the all-star team in baseball or in basketball? It's like the best of the best, right? Our Prophet ﷺ is the all-star amongst the prophets. Our ummah is supposed to be the all-stars amongst all the ummahs. And if you claim to be a follower of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, if you claim to be following the only book that was sent for all mankind, the Quran, until the Day of Judgment, and we claim to be part of the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, we have a much higher standard to live up to. And it's time that the young people start living up to that, so we don't have to, if you go to, because I spent last week in the hospital with Ibrahim, if you go to the hospital, there's something called emergency care, urgent care or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? Who goes to that? Who goes to that part of the hospital? Yeah? They're about to die, right? Okay? Right now, most of us are still in urgent care. Our souls are really shaking. I want to get to the point where these talks are not just urgent care talks. Let's keep you religious. And they become like you're going to get vitamins because you're getting stronger and you just want to get stronger and stronger. You want to look like O'Day. You know O'Day, right? No, I'm serious. But what happens? What happens when our iman, eyes here. What happens? I don't mean that as a joke. I mean that as a point. Listen carefully. What happens when our iman gets so strong that we're not thinking about being on life support anymore. We don't need electric shocks. You know what electric shocks are, right? When your heart's failing? We don't need electric shocks every year in Ramadan just to keep us religious. We're getting to the point where we're just training. We're getting stronger and stronger. And the day we die is the best day of our life because we're a little bit stronger than the day before and a little bit stronger than the day before. Our life starts to go like this. But what did I say? For the believer, there's a jump and then it starts to grow, right? How many of us are ready for that jump? Don't raise your hand. I want you to think about it. How many of us are like the companions that the day before they were worshiping idols, they saw the Prophet ﷺ's face, they heard one thing from the Prophet ﷺ, it hit their hearts so deeply that they were changed forever. Do we understand that some of the greatest companions were doing major sins a week before they were Muslim? Do we understand that? Like every bad thing in our society, there were companions who used to do that. And then we talk about them later like the greatest people that ever lived after the Prophet ﷺ in our ummah. How? How does that happen? Because everything they heard affected them. I was telling this, I was just like a year or two ago, I was thinking about this and it really blew me away. I mentioned this to some of you. The companions who died in Makkah, that were shaheed in Makkah, there were companions who were killed in Makkah. The companions who died soon after the Hijrah, the companions who died in the Battle of Badr, the companions who died in the Battle of Uhud, etc. Many of them, when they died, only 25% of the Quran had been revealed. Some of them didn't know what Surah Baqarah was, and they're like the greatest companions of all time. Some of them, like the early shaheed, you guys know the story of Ammar bin Yasir and his mom and they died and there were only a few surahs that had been revealed. And when they get to the day of judgment, they have fulfilled their oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because those 3 or 4 surahs that they heard, they lived up to it. Do we understand that Hamza, radiallahu anhu, what battle did he die in? Uhud. There was still almost 8 years of revelation after Uhud. 7 years of revelation after Uhud. He never heard all those verses of the Quran. All the things that the Prophet ﷺ said in the heat of Medina, he wasn't alive for it. He doesn't know about the Battle of the Trench. When he died, all those hadith that we hear, all the ones that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates, he didn't hear those hadith. Like they died in a moment in the seerah where maybe 30 out of 114 surahs had been revealed. And they lived and died on those surahs. It wasn't about quantity. Memorizing the Quran is a huge accomplishment. And I'm really proud of everyone here. But now the challenge becomes, we put it into our heads. Are we going to live by it now? Has it entered our hearts? One time the Prophet ﷺ was giving a speech to the companions. And if you've ever seen the books that talk about the khutbahs of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll see that they're really short. Because every word is like a zinger. One time he stood up in front of the companions. And they're ready for a speech from the Prophet ﷺ. And he says, Ittaqullah. Have taqwa with Allah. Which means like fear Allah, love Allah, have consciousness of Allah. And then he stopped. That was the end of the speech. And the companions didn't say, hey, come on. That's not what we paid for. If you go to ISNA convention and one of the big speakers now, like Imam Suhaib Webb or Sheikh Hamza Yusuf or someone, they go up to give that big speech. And you're like, wow, Saturday night, this is the speech. If Sheikh Hamza was to go up there and say, have consciousness of Allah, and get off the stage, people will start rioting outside the bazaar. Like, that's not, come on. We want a little bit more. But the companions didn't do that. They understood. He says, have consciousness of Allah, and they're like, whoa. That was like enough for them. Let me tell you something else that you may find interesting. Do you ever hear about those people that used to come to Medina from a different tribe, and they would ask Allah, the Prophet ﷺ for advice, and he would say something, and then they would go back? Have you ever heard a story like that? The man who says, Awsini, قال الرسول لا تغضب, he said, don't get angry. فردد مرارا, he asked him again, قال لا تغضب, he said, don't get angry. The man leaves and he lives on that. You ever wonder about that guy? Like he comes like all the way from like Iraq. He comes to Medina, it took him like 2 months to get there. He comes to the Prophet ﷺ, he spends a little time with him. The Prophet ﷺ gives him a few points of advice, very brief, a few bullet points. Then he goes back and he never sees the Prophet ﷺ again. Do you realize that? Most of those people, the next time they came to Medina was after the death or at the death of the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them came just for the last sermon. Those 100,000 people. But their whole life, they lived on 1 or 2 points of advice that the Prophet ﷺ gave them. It wasn't like a book. Like they had the Quran, of course. But in terms of advice from the Prophet ﷺ, he told them 1 or 2 things. It penetrated their hearts, and that was like enough for them to live with. How long will we have speeches after speeches before one thing you hear will enter your hearts and will transform you? And I'll tell you what that thing was for me. I was, this was, in high school I was involved with Minna and all that. If you know these guys like Munir and Ibrahim, they were all very involved. And I used to be involved then too with Minna. And I did a lot of speeches and stuff, but I didn't feel like that moment had hit me yet. I'd been to a bunch of Islamic programs, I studied overseas, but it was the most unexpected moment that my life was shook forever. I was at Georgetown, I was in college, my second year of college, I remember it to this day. My sophomore year of college, and I had to give a speech on Islam. I used to give halakas in college. And if anyone has given halakas, you know that sometimes you're not in the mood to give a halakah. And you're assigned. You're not even feeling like spiritual yourself. You're like struggling, and you suddenly have to give a speech in front of an audience, right? Like I'm feeling like that right now, kind of, to be honest. And you suddenly have to give a speech. So I was like struggling. I had like 30 minutes to my talk. I'm like reading from different books, trying to find something to talk about. And at that point, talking about Islam had become a routine for me. Because I used to give a halaqah every night in college, right, for 10 minutes. So it had become a routine. So I was just reading things and repeating them, reading things and repeating them. And little did I know that I was just going to flip a page and I'd be like my opening, right there. So I was getting ready for this talk, and I remember this talk, I wanted to give a talk on how we shouldn't follow other people, we should follow the Prophet ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I was going through hadith after hadith, and finally I read something, and I'll just summarize it. More or less, this is the meaning of the hadith. That the Prophet ﷺ said, listen to this carefully, and this just like shook me up. The Prophet ﷺ said, and when you're in public school or maybe you have a group of friends and they're doing something, this is a reminder to all of us. And I'll tell you something just because I told you, remember I told you in the beginning of the speech, I'm going to be real with you? So I'm going to be real with you and tell you something. I think it's really important for us to have good Muslim friends. I really believe that. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It is extremely important, maybe the most important thing we can do at our age is to surround ourselves with good people. But you know what the most dangerous thing is in this world? Bad Muslim friends. They are more dangerous than bad Christian friends. You know why? Because if you have a Christian or Jewish friend, and I have respect for Christianity and Judaism, this is not to criticize, but if you happen to have a Christian or Jewish friend or a Hindu friend and they're doing something bad, you can at least say to yourself, oh, but they're not Muslim, so they don't know. But when you have a Muslim friend and a group of Muslim friends, and there's 10 of you, and you guys all decide to do something bad, it is very hard to break out of that. And that is what's happening in Michigan right now. There are groups of Muslims that are dragging each other down. And I'm not talking about anyone else except myself. We have to all question if we're part of that. Because we're either part of the solution or we're part of the problem. And regardless if we have an Arabic name or some other name, it doesn't mean we're part of the solution just because we're named after a really awesome companion. We have to live up to that, right? So when I heard this is why it shook me up. The Prophet ﷺ said more or less, كما قال, he said, if you seek to please people, listen to this carefully. This literally changed me, like inside. I still made mistakes, but inside I was just like broken. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you seek to please people at the expense of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? You have a choice. This is what people want from me, and this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from me. And this could happen at any point in our life. It's not just about doing sins. Maybe that choice is that people want a certain career from me because it's prestigious, makes me look good. I can wear a pretty white jacket, and that's good. Doctors are probably the most honorable profession I've met in terms of saving lives. But if we do that just because people want it from us, and if we think we can serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by maybe studying Islam and teaching, and we go with one direction, this could go any way, right? Whenever we have the choice of pleasing people or pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's two roads. Prophet ﷺ said, those who seek to please people at the expense of pleasing Allah, instead of pleasing Allah, Allah will be upset with them, displeased with them, and He will cause those very people to be displeased with them. Even the people you are trying to please will not respect you. They're like, At first they'll be like, okay, he's going along with us. But nobody likes a blind follower. You know, we try to, so much about in high school and middle school, we're trying to be popular, part of the in-group. The people history remembers are never the people that were in the in-group, unless that in-group was a prophet's in-group. The only people that history will remember as great people were people that when the group was doing something, they made a choice to do something even if they were by themselves. Like Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was an ummah unto himself. The whole world was in one direction, Ibrahim alayhi salam was his own direction. That's what greatness is. Was Malcolm X following people? Tell me. When he was Detroit Red in prison, and he became part of the Nation of Islam, everyone, all his friends in prison said, what? You're crazy. Then he was part of the Nation of Islam. He went to Hajj, and he became an Orthodox Muslim, or like an actual Muslim. What did everyone in the Nation of Islam say? You're crazy. He didn't care. He walked his own road. Now, is he respected or not in America? Martin Luther King. Nowadays we think, oh, everyone loves him. Someone killed him. People were very, very angry with Martin Luther King, especially at the end of his life. But he always stood for what he believed in. Now, but the hadith is not over yet. So that was the first part. If someone seeks to please people, instead of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what will happen? Allah will be upset with them, obviously because they're not listening to Allah, but those same people will not respect them. But the other way around also. But those who seek to please Allah, even if it's at the expense of pleasing people, even if they have a choice of pleasing Allah and pleasing the rest of the world, they say forget the rest of the world. I'm with Allah. That's it. I don't care. I don't care if my friends aren't doing it. I don't care what everyone my age is doing in America. I don't care if everyone my age is watching 5 hours of TV. I say that's nonsense. I'm not going to do it. You understand what I'm saying? The people who decide to follow Allah, even if it means rejecting everyone else. Listen to this. Allah will be happy with them. But we expect that. But listen to the second part. And He will cause those very people to be happy with them. And I promise you, and I'm going to end with this inshallah, so I don't want to keep you too late. This is my last point inshallah. Literally in 2 minutes I'll be done. I promise you in my life, and I'm 28 years old, so I'm maybe between 10 and 15 years older than most of you, okay? Just take this from me and I mean this. The people I grew up with, when I was 14, they were 13 or 15, like we were buddies growing up. The people who were like their whole life, they were trying to be cool and just trying to be in and following everyone else. Right now, those same friends are calling me, asking me for advice. And I'm nobody, believe me. Like I don't think I'm anyone special. I'm not trying to be humble. Like I'm not like one of those like scholars that says I have to be humble. Like I really feel like I'm nothing. But if you see the life choices that we made, there was a point, and it was about when we were about 15 years old, that the friends that we had done you have that friend like you did everything with them. There was one point in our life that our life went in two different directions, right? There was one point in our life where our life went in different directions, and everything changed from there. It was like when you have dominoes and you hit one and they all fall down. You make a choice at one point in your life, and it takes you on a road, and that road goes on, and after 2 or 3 years, you look back at that friend, and you guys are two different people. Wallahi, I'm saying, I don't ever say wallahi. Listen to me. You are at the point in your life where you're going to make a dramatic choice. You know Umar radiallahu anhu, right? We talked about him. His friend was who? One of his friends was Abu Jahl. And the Prophet ﷺ once made dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthened the ummah with one of these two people. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthened the ummah with one of the two people. Who were these two people? So I'm just going to put this down if that's okay. He made the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthened the ummah with Abu Jahl or Umar. And who did he choose? Umar radiallahu anhu. But they were at a very similar point before that. Umar made a choice, Abu Jahl made a choice, and it's buzzing a lot. So Umar, okay. I don't know. It's okay. Umar made okay. The two of them made two different choices, right? And that choice that they made all the difference. And the people who made the right choices from my friend circle, their entire life, from the perspective of this life and the akhirah, was different. Like if I had, for example, 10 friends, it's just 2 minutes. The friends that I had from that group, listen to me very carefully. The ones that stayed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they changed their life and became good people, they're the ones who got to med school. They're the ones who became engineers. They're the ones who became teachers. They're the ones that actually, even in this worldly life, they're the ones who accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. It's not like, oh, they were successful in this life and others are successful in the akhirah. What's that dua we make? Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan. And I promise you, the people who are close to Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, they say, oh, you have to sacrifice a lot to be a good Muslim. You don't sacrifice anything. Because you have more fun in this life. You have more success in this life. You feel more happiness in this life. You feel more peace in this life. When you marry your wife, you actually look at her in the eyes and tell her you were loyal to her, as opposed to looking into her eyes with guilt. When your children come up to you 20 years from now or 30 years from now, and they say they want to date, you can tell them, I didn't date, you shouldn't date. As opposed to, I did a lot of stuff, but you shouldn't do it. I'm serious. You know how beautiful marriage is when you hold your wife's hand and she knows that that's the first woman who you've ever held her hand? And when you guys go to a movie together, is the first time that you've ever been to a movie with a girl and you're both nervous. And you know people who date, you know how it feels when they get married? It's just like the 30-second date. Like when you hug your wife and she knows that's the first time you've ever hugged a woman, you know that's love. That's a love that we can't imagine. But if you mess around, tell me, have you ever done something bad and the next day felt good about it? Has it made you more happy? I'm saying stuff that's supposed to make you happy. That's haram. Isn't it one day of like fun and then 1 year of regret? Right or wrong? So my friends that made the right choices, every aspect of their life is better right now. It's not just in the akhirah. Their heaven has started in this life. And this is the choice you're going to make. Popularity, even worldly popularity. Some people say, oh, if I want to be popular, I want to be well known. You know, have you heard the story of Musab ibn Umar, the really popular guy in Makkah, and then he gave it all up, and then People always say like he gave up his popularity and then he died in the battle and he had no money or anything. Do you remember that story? He was like the most popular guy in Makkah and he sacrificed all of it for the religion. You know what the very interesting thing is though? He actually didn't give up any of his popularity. Musab ibn Umar is much more popular now than he was when he was in Makkah and he was the most popular guy in Makkah. You know why? Because there's like 50 people in Rochester Hills, Michigan talking about him 1,400 years after he died. How can you be more popular than that? You think there's anyone more popular than Abu Bakr? There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Does anyone not know who Abu Bakr is? Is that popular? Is there anyone more popular than the Prophet ﷺ? So some people say, oh, if I become Muslim, I won't be cool anymore. I got to sacrifice, but it's worth it. We don't sacrifice anything by being religious. We get everything. Money? What did the Prophet ﷺ say about wealth? The people who go after Allah, the world comes to them like slaves. People who are closer to Allah, they get sick of money. They keep donating, they keep getting it back, and they have to get rid of it again. Everything we're looking for in our life, I promise you, if you want to be in love, if you want to be happy, if you want to belong in a group, if you want to be accepted, if you want to be powerful, whatever we want within the realms of Islam, everything we ever wanted, we get when we make the right choice. And everything we ever wanted, we actually lose when we make the wrong choice. There is no sacrifice in being religious. It is a win-win-win situation. And there is nothing to be gained from being away from Allah. It's a lose-lose-lose situation. We lose in this life, we lose in the day of judgment, and we lose in the hereafter. Does that make sense? Okay? So I'm going to end with that, but what I want to do is I'm going to give 1 minute. I want everyone to close their eyes. Okay? Close your eyes right now, and I'll tell you what to think about. As we close our eyes, I'm going to close my eyes. I want you to think about who you are. I want you to think about what you've heard today. And think about the story of Umar that I spoke about, radiallahu anhu. And I want you to ask yourself if this is the moment in which something will break inside of you and you will live your entire life like a companion. And like I said earlier, you'll start living like Abu Bakr and you'll give up Abu Jahl. Okay, so we're going to take 1 minute. I want you to think about that and then we'll end the chapter. Okay, open up your eyes. Did you see that what silence does? Do you feel it? When you're silent, how your heart's at peace? This is the silence that we need to bring back into our lives. Until we turn off our cell phones and our laptops and our Facebook and the internet and the TV and our friends and we find a place to be alone, we will never have silence in our life. And if we never have silence, we'll never grow. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We'll end with Surah Asr. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.